Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang. I shall now request Narayananji, who is at the Kendra Shrine, to initiate with puja. Narayanji.
Om Achyutaya Namaha, Om Anandaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha. Shuklam Varadanam Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadhanam Dhyaye Sarvavighnopashante Ayamurta Samusardosto Bandhono Pranando Ayamurta Samusardosto Tadeva Daganam Savinam Tadeva Taravalam Tandram Chandravalam Tadeva Vidyavalam Devavam Tadeva Lakshmi Padete Tengrim Purani Om Om Suva Om Maha Om Janam Om Tava Om Satyam Om Tatsodarvavanyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat Om Abhi Jyotir Samradam Namaskaram Namo Pata Samasta Durga Chaitvarasi Parnasati Chittam Karishymanasya Karmanaha Nirvayanam Pasyatattam Madhav Vignesha Pujam Karshye Prithviyam Niripulisi Sulam Chandakurmo Devada Prithvi Diya Durga Loga Devam Vishnu Durga Tvam Satare Mam Devi Putram Gurusasanam Agamartam Tu Devanam Kamnartam Tu Rakshasam Kandaravam Karam Yadu Devadavanalanjanam Namopata Samasta Durga Shaitvarasi Parmesati Chittam Nirvindasi Chittam Madhav Vignesha Pujam Karshye Ganaranta Ganapati Kumavamiye Kavinga Vinamo Vasatramam Jeshtanajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspade Anusunum Pussisaganam Asmin Garchara Vinde Mahaganapatim Jaya Mahaganapatim Avamayami Om Mahaganapatiin Asram Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Arjam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Padyam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Asmiyam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Upasarikastanam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Stananandaramasmiyam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Vastradatam Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Yagnova Vedartam Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Gandham Dharayami Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Gandhovari Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Varanganatam Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Maritra Kungumam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiin Pushpai Pujayami Om Sumudaya Namaha Om Ekadandaya Namaha Om Kapilaya Namaha Om Gajagarnagaya Namaha Om Lambodharaya Namaha Om Vigadaya Namaha Om Vigdharajaya Namaha Om Vinayagaya Namaha Om Dhumagedave Namaha Om Ganatakshaya Namaha Om Balachandraya Namaha Om Gajananaya Namaha Om Vakradundaya Namaha Om Surpakarnaya Namaha Om Hirambaya Namaha Om Skandaburdhavaya Namaha Om Siddhavinayagare Namaha Om Shankara Moksha Vinayagare Namaha Om Atipura Vinayagare Namaha Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Nana Vidha Paramana Patra Pushpani Samarpayami धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। दीपार्थं समर्पयामि। अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवसवितुर्वरेण्यं सत्यं प्रसंगामि। ओम स्वाहा, ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा, ओम अपानाय स्वाहा, ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा, ओम उदानाय स्वाहा, ओम समानाय स्वाहा, ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। कदलीपழं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतं पुत्रामृतं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। गणानां नमामि। कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पद आनन्दं। नमो नमो गणेशाय नमस्ते विष्णुने नमस्ते गुरुवाय नमः। अव्यानमद्मार्गं गजाननमार्मिकम् अनेकदन्तं भक्तानाम् एकदन्तम् उपास्महे। वक्रतुण्डमहाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मर्यं समर्पयामि। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। वक्रतुण्डमहाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं शिरसा प्रणमामि। ओम ओम भुवः ओम स्वः ओम वः ओम जनवन्तव ओम सत्यम् ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओमावज्योतिर्समन्वस्वरम् उमोपात समस्त दुर्गा शतवारासी परमेश्वर द्वितीयतम सुबे शोभने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय प्रार्थे श्रीवेदे पराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे वादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरो दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाप्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रवादिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये शुभकृतनाम संवत्सरे दक्षिणायने वर्ष ऋतु सिंह मासे आवनी मासे शुक्लपक्षे द्वितीय तिथियां शुभतिथौ भानुवासरयुक्तायां पूर्व फल्गुनी नक्षत्रयुक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभकर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायां अस्यां द्वितीय तिथियां शुभतिथौ मम जन्मप्रति एतत्दिनपर्यन्तं मध्ये सम्भाषणं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्य मनोनाथम् अस्माहं सहकुर्माणं क्षेमसद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्यनामविरुद्धं समस्तमङ्गलाभ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोषशान्त्यर्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये। तदंगम कलश पूजां च करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। सोमनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय सह कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठेन समाधित मूले तत्र सिद्धितो ब्रह्मा मातृगुणे समृद्धा कुशौ तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तद्वीपा सुंदरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो सर्वण गंगे से सैन्य गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु। अन्ते से सहिता सर्वे कलशां समाचरिता आयान्तु देव पूजार्थं दुर्दशकारगा। अंबूरा सागरोपन्नो विष्णुना विष्णु करे देव से पूजित परिये भाग्य नमोस्तुते देवो दैवादि कुप्त जीव दिवसानन अंजार निर्माल्यम सोयम मोने पूजयेत् ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्तियुक्ता योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदि गुरुमाय नमः अनंताय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवोप्यो नमः दश दिग्पालिप्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परम ब्रह्मा तस्मै से गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य श्री प्राण प्रतिष्ठा मंत्रस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरेखि सामधर्वाणि संतांसि सकल जगत सृष्टि सदि सम्मार्गारणि प्राण शक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिम शक्ति लोम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठा विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरि आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंद्रजनिभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनागाभ्यां नमः आम गरिष्ठभूम्यां नमः आम युधियाय नमः ओम सरसे स्वाहा ओम अष्टाय दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तांबोधिस्त बोधोलिस्त तरुणसोडकराब्जे वासं गोदंडम इक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचमाणात् विप्राणस्य कवालंतनेन सदा पिनव सुरोटिया देवी बालार्गवना बहुसूरि प्राणसति परान ओम आमरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिमाम अम्यम रमलम वंशम सम्म हंस स्वम स्वम हंस अस्यामूर्तौ जीवदिष्टदो अस्यामूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्सस्त्र जीव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपाद वायुस्थानि या कष्टि स्वस्ति सुगम सरम दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा ओम अस्य श्री प्राणदष्टामस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरेखि सामधर्वाणि संतांसि सकल जगत सृष्टि सदि सम्मार्गारणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति लोम तिलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठापने नियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंद्रजिनिभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनागाभ्यां नमः हरिं गरिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः रोम करतलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं सरसे स्वाहा रोम सिगायं सत् आम कौसायं हरिण्यत्रदाय रोम अस्त्रदाय पट गुरु स्वरूप दिग्बंध असुनीदे पुनरस्माक्ष सक्ष पुनः प्राणवे नोइदे लोकम जोग पश्य में सूर्य मुच्चर मनमुदे मलयाल स्मृति आवायुदो भव सत्ताविदो भव सन्निहितो भव सन्निहितो भव अवगुंबितो भव सुब्रसन्नो भव सुब्रसन्नो भव सुमुगो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामिन् सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं प्रतिभावेन बिंदेस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमो श्री कुबेराय नमः चतुर्लोक बंधन जन पौलुषि परत्रपाः लक्ष्मी प्रदसी मानगद प्रिय ईश्वरा और रिसाइट रत्नोस्तोत्रम श्री गुरुदेव नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परम ब्रह्मा तस्मै से गुरवे नमः अपार सच्चि सुकुमारी राशोर्यशोर्य मात्रम भुवनम समस्तं गुणायुधं तं रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविनीनं गिरिधि चिन्तयामि ओम महासेन महोंसेन जाताय नमः ओम श्री रमणाय नमः ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः ओम औजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगत्पितावताराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनाथास्तलोचिताय नमः ओम पराशर कुलोतंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरातलवत्पदाय नमः ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम सयायम्बाश्रयायवते नमः ओम शोणासुरमौलीनमानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्थगाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशान्तमहास्थले लप्तविद्योदयाय नमः ओम महाशक्तिनिवादेन प्रवृत्ताय नमः ओम परमार्थविदे नमः ओम दिव्यराय नमः ओम पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृपदे नमः ओम पितृराजेष्ठ सोणशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः ओम तपोमयाय नमः ओम उदासीनाय नमः ओम महायोगिने नमः ओम महोत्साहाय नमः ओम कुशाग्रदिये नमः ओम शांतसंकल्प संभ्रमाय नमः ओम सुसुदृशे नमः ओम सवित्रे नमः ओम स्थिराय नमः ओम तपस्वीद सर्वंगाय नमः ओम उल्लाम्बुज विलोचनाय नमः ओम चंद्रकाशिदास श्री मंडितानिल मंडलाय नमः ओम सूदवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः, ओम सूर्यदाकिनी विप्रमाय नमः, ओम वेद वेदांत तत्त्वज्ञाय नमः, ओम चिन्मुत्रिणे नमः, ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः, ओम विरूपाक्ष भुवावासाय नमः, ओम विराजत सदागुहे नमः, ओम उच्चित्त नयनाय नमः, ओम पूर्णाय नमः, ओम रसिदास्कृतांडवाय नमः, ओम गंभीराय नमः, ओम परमाचार्याय नमः, ओम सुप्रसन्याय नमः, ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः, ओम दक्षिणाशिनिवाय नमः, ओम धीराय नमः, ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः, ओम स्वराजे नमः, ओम महर्षिये नमः, ओम भगवते नमः, ओम ईत्याय नमः, ओम भूमविद्या विशारदाय नमः, ओम विमलाय नमः, ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः, ओम आप्ताय नमः, ओम ऋतुमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः, ओम समत्रुसे नमः, ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः, ओम सत्याय नमः, ओम प्रसादाय नमः, ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः, ओम सुकुमाराय नमः, ओम सदानंदाय नमः, ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः, ओम दयार्णवाय नमः, ओम श्री सोणासुर युरुद्भूत स्कंदाश्रम दिगेंद्राय नमः, ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टरे नमः, ओम सद्भक्त वृंद प्रदाय नमः, ओम गणेश मुनिप्रियं सेवितां कुशलोरुवाय नमः, ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ संसिद्ध संशयाय नमः, ओम वर्णासमुदादिदाय नमः, ओम रसज्ञाय नमः, ओम सौम्याय नमः, ओम आत्मवदे नमः, ओम सर्वावरि पदस्थानां महारात्याय नमः, ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः, ओम आत्मारामाय नमः, ओम महाभागाय नमः, ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः, ओम विरदाय नमः, ओम विरुदाय नमः, ओम विप्राय नमः, ओम मुनिन्द्राय नमः, ओम भावगोकुलाय नमः, ओम दर्शनादक संहारणे नमः, ओम मौनेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः, ओम ऋचादिकर्षानित्याय नमः, ओम स्मरणाद्बन्धमोचकाय नमः, ओम अन्तस्मिनचण्डांशवे नमः, ओम संसारोन्मुत्तारकाय नमः, ओम सोणादिष्टरे नमः, ओम अर्थविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः, ओम अविच्युतनिजप्रज्ञाय नमः, ओम नैसर्गिकमातृसे नमः, ओम कमण्डलधराय नमः, ओम सुब्रकविनवसनाय नमः, ओम भुवाय नमः, ओम दंडमाणिये नमः, ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः, ओम पवरोगपिशक्वराय नमः, ओम स्कंदाय नमः, ओम देवदमाय नमः, ओम अमर्तयाय नमः, ओम शेनानिये नमः, ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री कार्तिकाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री मुरुगाय वल्ली देवाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री सुब्रमण्याय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री स्वामीनाथने नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री नटराजने नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री भैरवरे नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री शिव पार्वतीये नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः। चिदानंदरूपं शिवोऽहं 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 चिदानंदरूपं चिदानंदरूपं शिवोऽहं 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 चिदानंदरूपं चिदानंदरूपं शिवोऽहं 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 चिदानंदरूपं। उपदेशसारं कर्तुराज्ञया प्रापदे फलं कर्मगिम्बरं कर्मदज्जडं बृहति महततो पदनकारणं फलमशाश्वतं गदनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेचयाकृतं सिद्धशोधकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुत्तमं भोजनं जव चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगतैषधी युक्तसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनम् उत्तमस्तवा दुष्यमं तद सिद्धजं जव ज्ञानमुद्गमम् आद्यधारया प्रोदसारमम् सरलचिन्तनम् विरलधवरम् वेदभावना सौवमित्यसौ भावना विना भावनीमना भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुद्धमा तिरुस्तरे मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगवो गाचनिश्चितम् वायुरोदना दीयते मन जालभक्षिव लोदसाधनम् सिद्धवायव सिद्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्वयि शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदम्बुल भवति नो मृदम् प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नाशमेत्यद नष्टमानसो दुष्टयोगिन नित्यमस्ति स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिदं चित्तमात्मन चित्वदर्शनं तत्वदर्शनं मानसं दुगिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अहमयं कुतो भवति चिनवद ऐपदत्यहं निजविसारणम् अहमिनाशवा यमहं दया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिक्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अप्यल्यसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीतम नामसेकस दज्जडं ससत् सत्वभासिगा चित्ववेदरा सत्तया इचित् चित्तयायहम् ईसजीवयो वेशदीपिता सस्वभावदो वस्तु केवलं वेशानद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनं स्वात्मरूपद आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठदा ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनचि ज्ञानमस्ति ज्ञातुमन्तरं किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा आपूर्णसित्सुखं बन्धमुक्त्यदि तं परं सुखं विन्दधीयै विवस्तुदैविक अहमवेदकं निजविभानकं महतितं तवो रमणवागियं महतितं तवो रमणवागियं महतितं तवो रमणवागियम् अरुणाचलवरदाय ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचलवरदाय ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचलवरदाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय
Namo. Welcome to all devotees for Delhi Satsang. Exactly 1 year ago, we had started this journey of going through 42 verses selected from Bhagavad Gita by Bhagavan Ramana Maharishi with Raghav ji. Today is the concluding session of the song Celestial or Gita Sara. We shall be completing the summary of the second half of these 42 verses, which, among other topics, contains Bhagwan's self-inquiry method explained in Gita verses in the words of Sri. Our speaker for today's session is Sri Raghav ji, who has been guiding us for the last 1 year. And I shall now request him to take over and kindly guide all of us. Raghav ji, over to you.
Sahana bhavatu, sahanau bhunaktu, saha viryam karavavahai, tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Vande Shri Ramanarshe Acharyasya Padabjam Yo me darshayadisham bhantam dhvantamatitya Parthasarati rupena shravayitva shubhangiram Parthasyaarti haro devaha kripa murtis sapadunaha. Namaste and welcome to this concluding session of the song Celestial or Gita Saraha, as Bhagavan had titled it. So we were looking at these 42 verses for the last 1 year. It's been a very fruitful and meaningful journey, dwelling upon these three gigantic minds who are one with Ishvara, namely our Guru Bhagavan Sri Ramana and Vyasa Bhagavan, who has strung together the words of Krishna Bhagavan in the Mahabharata in the form of the Bhagavad Gita. So like I always love to say, we are in touch with and getting the blessings of Vyasa Bhagavan, Sri Krishna Bhagavan and our Guru Sri Ramana Maharshi through this study of the Bhagavad Gita. And as we saw in the last session, Bhagavan, as does Sri Krishna, doesn't underestimate the disciple and instead unfolds with a bang, as it were, the very highest teaching of the self. And he knows that there is nothing really wrong with any jiva. Every jiva is Brahman. So there's no reason that a jiva cannot appreciate the self. And so the highest teaching is given upfront without any clauses or qualifying adjunct saying you have to first do this or first do that. So the benefit of doubt is given to the student, to the Shishya, that if he or she is open, then definitely he can get the glimpse of the self. And after first unfolding the nature of the self and affirming that self is not conditioned by space or time, consciousness, which is the truth of what you are, is the locus of all joy, all happiness. And it is here and now. So by strongly affirming that, our Guru gives us a perspective which no one in society gives right from childhood. The conditioning that each of us is subjected to from childhood onwards is that you're not okay, you're not adequate, you have to become adequate, you have to do something and prove you're somebody. So that conditioning is countered by the Guru, saying you don't have to do anything. You're first okay as you are, and then, of course, you will love to be a transparent instrument in the hands of Ishvara. That is the spirit of the Guru's teaching. That's why the Guru's teaching says that you're okay as you are. He totally validates you as a complete Purnaha, a being who is complete, the very locus of all happiness. And then, of course, yes, there are certain things we need to deal with in our minds. We can deal with that, but not with a judgment that I am not okay. So this unfoldment of the self was there in the initial phase in these 42 verses. And Bhagavan, if you remember, quotes the 20th shloka of the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the fourth in this selection. Ahamatma Gudakesha Sarvabhutashayastitaha Ahamadischa Madhyancha Bhutana Manta Evacha. So Bhagavan says that shloka is probably one of the most important shlokas. Actually, Bhagavan says it is the essence of the Gita conveyed in that shloka. And I also explained why that is the case, because Aham, the individual, and Krishna or Bhagavan, Ishvara, who is the cause of the universe, are equated. So that's a Mahavakya. So that statement, when understood appropriately, is a Mahavakya. So Bhagavan has highlighted that shloka there. So we saw that all in the last session. And I also pointed out how the Guru is vital in this whole unfoldment, because once we are able to appreciate, okay, there is a human embodiment who is completely one with this truth, that is the greatest incentive, greatest motivation, and a certain symbol of that very jnanam. Otherwise, it is very abstract. But when we see the Guru as embodying that knowledge, that is very encouraging. In fact, it is said that Satsanga itself is the very effortless process of appreciating this Brahmajnana. Because when we are with the mind of the Guru, when our mind resonates with Bhagavan's mind, that is the easiest way to allow our mind to seep in, to allow the mind to seep the knowledge or to absorb the knowledge within itself. And so without much effort, much struggle, Satsanga is a very effective and so helpful in assimilating this vision, this knowledge. Patanjali Maharshi, the famous author of the Yoga Sutras, in fact, explicitly mentions this in a very nice, succinct sutra, saying, Vitaraga Vishayam Va Chittam. He says that you just meditate on a great Mahatma whose mind is completely devoid of any small desire, meaning the ajnana is not there. And by such meditation on the very personality of the Guru itself, of the Guru himself, that vision or that vidya is slowly assimilated. So one of the very important supporting meditations. No doubt, self-inquiry is the main sadhana, but this meditation on the Guru is extremely helpful, supportive, and a very gentle assimilation of the knowledge can happen by that. So all of this is to say that both meditation on the personality of the Guru, looking at him, appreciating him as the embodiment of the teaching, is all very essential in this journey to Advaita Jnana. It's not abstract. It's something very living, very immediate. That is again and again conveyed to us. So for many of us, therefore, even reading the life and the incidents in Bhagavan's life are so helpful, because they are that same knowledge brought to life, brought to bear on day-to-day events, brought to bear on the challenges of life as it unfolds. It was not as if Bhagavan was indifferent to what was around. He was no doubt dispassionate. That's the correct word, dispassionate. He was not attached in the sense that he didn't have an axe to grind, of course, but he was never indifferent. Bhagavan was full of compassion. And so all his actions as seen by others are an embodiment of the jnana. So what Bhagavan did was the very will of Ishvara, as it were, in that particular situation, which is why the satsanga of the Guru is so helpful in assimilating the vision of jnana and understanding how it plays, how it gets embodied. Embodied means applied in our lives. You know, the word embody, I often use it. It implies how it gets connected with our life It's no longer just an understanding within the mind, which is good. It's not something to be dismissed, an understanding which we have within ourselves. But when we embody it, it implies that our lifestyle is integrated with what we believe to be true. That is embodiment. And so satsanga is also so important. All of this was, summarized in these earlier shlokas in different ways. Most of us have heard or read clearly about the near-death experience of Bhagavan, where the jnana takes place in Madurai, born of Bhagavan's immense life led over so many lifetimes. The very experience led to total assimilation and immersion as a sahaja into the jnana itself. So the death experience in Madurai was both the start and the end of Bhagavan's sadhana. He was an outstanding avatara. More than anyone, he didn't need any long sadhana. Bhagavan was, of course, the exception. He never said, if you just imitate that, you will get the jnana. It was very clear. Bhagavan had that special grace, that special past, which made him so easily become a sahaja, assimilated and immersed in that jnana, become one with that jnana. And at the same time, it's interesting to note that this truth that there is the self, which is not going to get destroyed when the body gets destroyed, it is so emphatically revealed in Bhagavan's life incidents, both the death experience in Madurai and another very meaningful incident which happened even in Arunachala, where Bhagavan's body nearly becomes lifeless, and the the heartbeat stops, the breathing stops, and yet inside Bhagavan says that I felt the full force of my being. I was unperturbed. So even in Arunachala it happened. If I recollect, there was an incident where Bhagavan goes from Virupaksha cave, he descends down and turns left towards the Pachayamman Kovil. And as he walks there and they're coming back, Bhagavan says that suddenly on 2-3 occasions, 2-3 times it happens, namely a certain fit of complete cessation of consciousness. And the third time this happens, Bhagavan just sits against a rock in a steady posture, not leaning, but just near a rock. And Bhagavan says that this white screen of light, as it were, came upon my mind and completely shut out the external world to my senses. But I was able to hear the wailing of my associates. One Vasudeva Shastri ji was there, and he is crying, "Oh Bhagavan, you have left us," and so on. And Bhagavan says, I was fully aware of what was going on, and yet unperturbed. The body became still, the heartbeat stopped, the breathing stopped. It was like the full death kind of an experience. And yet the truth of I was ever shining. There was no change in that inner awareness of what I am. So Bhagavan once again affirmed the truth of the self, even in Arunachala. And after some time, again, the body came back to activity and the heartbeat resumed. The earlier blueness of the skin again went away. The blood circulation started. The extremities of his body had become very cold, and again they started warming up. He sweated. And so Bhagavan vividly describes how that death experience came. All of this is to say that he is the living embodiment of the truth of endurance, the fact that the self is not something that's going to go away when the body dies. That self is unaffected no matter what happens to the body. So by again and again staying and dwelling upon this truth embodied in Bhagavan, we too can develop that Shraddha. So it's very helpful to therefore dwell upon even the different incidents in the life of Bhagavan in assimilating this Gita vision. So achedyoyam adahyoyam akredyo ashosyevacha nitya sarvagata sthana rachaloyam sanatanaha. When we say, Bhagavan Krishna says that this consciousness is not in time, it is not in space, it is untouched by fire, unwetted by water, and so on. All that is embodied in this experience of Bhagavan, which each one of us too can assimilate in one's understanding. So in this way, when the unfoldment takes place, Bhagavan then in the second half starts shifting the focus of the teaching of Bhagavad Gita to the actual practice of it, how each one of us can assimilate and understand that vision, which is known as Atma Vichara. So to complete that discussion, we will see the shlokas where we left off in the last session. So one of the key shlokas there is how there is an emphasis on effort. So we often have this dilemma that should I make some effort? If everything is predestined, I need not make any effort, right? So Bhagavan at several places does say that everything is predestined. Even when you're moving from one room to another, that too is predestined. So to that extent, Bhagavan gives the Upadesha saying, this kartrutvam, this sense that I am the doer, is illusory. So that is the emphasis there. We should not misunderstand Bhagavan's teaching there to say that no effort is necessary. In many places, Bhagavan clarifies that the effort is also part of your destiny, could very well be part of your destiny. So we cannot second guess our destiny and say, okay, I won't make any effort because everything is predestined. The logic doesn't work like that. So at one place, Bhagavan goes on to say how even this idea that there's predestiny is an impediment. I thought I'd share with you one interesting passage in Author Osborne's book and then tie it up with what is given in the Bhagavad Gita. So I'll just read that for you. How Bhagavan explains that this idea that everything is predestined should be properly understood, not to just become complacent or not to, as an excuse to not make any kind of meaningful choice in our life. So Bhagavan says here, the apparently conflicting view that a man makes his own destiny is no less true, because everything happens by the law of cause and effect, and every thought, word, and action brings about its repercussion. Sri Bhagavan was as definite about this as the other masters. To Sivaprakasam Pillai, in a reply, Bhagavan says, as beings reap the fruit of their actions in accordance with God's laws, the responsibility is theirs, it is not God's. So Bhagavan constantly stressed the need for effort. It is recorded in Maharshi's Gospel. Remember, Maharshi's Gospel is one of the very classic books compiled by Morris Friedman. It's a must-read for many devotees. Very succinct, summarizes the method, and very focused answers without, any exaggeration. Very well written, well compiled work there, Maharshi's Gospel. And it is recorded there when devotee complains that Bhagavan, after leaving this ashram in October, I was aware of the peace that prevails in Sri Bhagavan's presence, enfolding me for about 10 days. All the time while I was busy in my work, there was an undercurrent of that peace. And it was almost like a dual consciousness which one experiences. So that peace was there with him as an undercurrent amidst all his activities, he says. And then he goes on to say, and then that peace faded out entirely and the old stupidities came in instead. To which Bhagavan replied, if you strengthen the mind, that peace will become constant. Its duration is proportionate to the strength of mind acquired by repeated practice. So there you go, Bhagavan is very clear. So repeated practice as per your definition, okay? As per whatever you are in your understanding, feeling as practice, one has to stay with that. Because sometimes the mind has this tendency, what is the right practice? Should I do this? Should I do that? And it goes on, ruminating over all the alternatives, doing nothing in effect. Instead, one can go with one's understanding, whatever be defined as practice or sadhana. It could be japa, it could be various kinds of visualization, dhyana, or self-inquiry, atma vichara, or nididhyasanam. Whichever way one chooses to look at it, when one honestly and sincerely pursues that practice with a lot of intensity, meaning time and energy invested in it, for sure Bhagavan's grace will come. One doesn't have to worry too much about the particular lacunae in any practice. Every practice will have some pitfalls, some lacunae. So we need not allow the mind to take that as an excuse to not do anything. So Bhagavan is very clear saying that the peace will become constant, the peace will become constant, and its duration is proportionate to the strength of mind acquired by repeated practice. And then Bhagavan goes on to say, if everything happens according to destiny, even the obstacles that retard and prevent one, this is the question. Okay, so if everything happens according to destiny, even the obstacles that retard and prevent one from successfully carrying out the meditation may have to be considered as insuperable. Insuperable means you cannot overcome them, unsurmountable. And how then can one ever hope to surmount them? So the disciple is saying, if everything is predestined, these obstacles are so big, it's not in my hands to try and surmount them. That's not my destiny. I can't do anything about them. And then Bhagavan replied, that which is called destiny, which is preventing meditation, exists only to the externalized, not to the introverted mind. So when the mind is drawn within by the sadhana, there is no destiny or anything. It's all a matter of one's choice there. So it exists only to the externalized mind, which is taking on all these roles in Vyavahara. That's when destiny comes in. When it comes to the truth of oneself, it's not a question of destiny. It's a question of owning up what is already there. So Bhagavan says, therefore, he who seeks inwardly in quest of the self, remaining as he is, does not get frightened by any impediment that may seem to stand in the way of carrying on his practice of meditation. The very thought of such obstacles is the greatest impediment. So Bhagavan thus affirms that one has to intelligently make these choices and not get carried away by that idea of destiny. So it's important there. And this shlokas here also emphasize that. We will just see a couple of shlokas to embody that very idea. So in the 23rd shloka here, which is from the 3rd chapter, Sri Krishna also says a similar idea, saying, Evam buddhe param buddha samstabhyatmanam atmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. So in this way, buddhehe param buddha. So one slowly draws in the mind and allows the mind to resolve and quieten, so that you are able to arrive and abide as the self. Buddhehe param. So it's not even the buddhi, but something even transcending the buddhi. It is the very truth of the buddhi. So in this way, the effort has to be made. That is the idea. Samstabhya atmanam atmana. So one has to gradually draw in the mind, not just allow the mind to be the way it is. So you make an effort to gently draw in the mind. Samstabhya. Samstabhya means fixing or establishing the mind, using the very mind, but the intelligent part of the mind. You have to treat the rest of your mind like a child. And so the intelligent part of the mind, which is in harmony with Bhagavan's teaching, is there. And yes, to start with, there is a certain restless part of the mind. So Atmana Atmanam Samstabhya. So how the Acharya says that, okay, you use your own mind to gently draw in the mind. And the idea is that the wiser part of you, that part of you which really is in harmony with the Guru's teaching, gently applies itself to drawing in the other restless part of you. And so this practice is very required. It's not something that happens automatically. So all those who are devoted to Bhagavan, therefore, we are to pay attention to how Bhagavan says that one has to make this effort. Samstabhya atmanam atmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. So in this way, that desire which is at the essence of, which is the core of all dukkha, is just transcended. If you remember in the previous lecture, in the talk, I mentioned how the whole process of our mind and our involvement in samsara is summarized by these three key words. Avidya, the source, self-ignorance, which leads to karma. Okay, avidya is the cause, karma is the effect. Karma is then the cause, karma is the effect, action. Avidya, karma, karma. That is the essence of samsara. When we use the word samsara, means going around and round in circles, not getting to the happiness that we seek. And the links in this samsara chakra, this circle of samsara, are avidya, the root cause. That root cause, I am small, I am inadequate, leads to karma. Trying to become adequate by achieving this, by getting this object, or by looking forward to getting to some status. It could be either an external achievement or some object which we want to get, some relationship. All of that is of the nature of karma. So trying to become full by something external to yourself. And that leads to karma or actions. So karma is the mentation, the internal desire. And that desire, when it is strong, leads to karma. Avidya, kama, karma. And so the reverse has to be done in the process of self-knowledge or self-inquiry. So all karmas are gradually filtered out, made as an offering to Ishvara. Then they stop binding us. Then the kamas are filtered by having only those which are helpful for our true well-being. And then finally, avidya is addressed by self-inquiry. So you like rewind back from avidya, kama, karma, rewind the karmas, and only a few kamas remain. Those kamas are further resolved. And finally, avidya is addressed through self-inquiry. This is the three-step rewinding process to arrive at the self. So this shloka conveys that very importance of effort. And then two of the most important verses in the Bhagavad Gita for all those, particularly those who are committed to Bhagavan and his teaching. The whole path of self-inquiry is summarized in these two verses. And it's not a surprise that Bhagavan himself refers in a conversation with Sri Gurram Subramaya ji that this verse is the quintessence of wisdom. So there was one verse in the 10th chapter which Bhagavan praises also as the most important shloka in the Gita. This verse, which is from the 6th chapter of the Gita, the 25th verse, he refers to this also as the quintessence of wisdom. So we will chant that shloka and see how this is the essence of the self-inquiry path of Bhagavan. I stress this again because sometimes there's a misunderstanding born of inadequate exposure to the Bhagavad Gita from a proper tradition, where we try to say Bhagavan has taught something different from the Gita. Not at all true. This verse Bhagavan has affirmed is the quintessence and also included in this selection. And even the explanation of the verse is something which dovetails exactly into the self-inquiry method. So we will chant this shloka here. It is there in the 6th chapter, the 25th shloka. Shanai Shanai Ruparame Buddhya Dhriti Grihitaya Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Kinchidapi Chintayet Yato Yato Nischarati Manaschanchalamassthiram Tatas Tato Niyam Yaitat Atman Yeva Vasham Nayet Shanai Shanai Ruparame Buddhya Dhriti Grihitaya Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Nakinchidapi Chintayet Yato Yato Nischarati Manaschanchalamassthiram Tatas Tato Niyam Yaitat Atman Yeva Vasham Nayet. So the first shloka here says, Shanai Shanai Ruparame. Gradually may we draw in the mind, Buddhya Dhriti Grihitaya, by a strong and resolute buddhi. Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Nakinchidapi Chintayet. And may one abide as the self and not allow other thoughts to draw us away from the self. So this keyword Atma Samstam Manah Kritva is what conveys the essence here. So the idea is therefore, even as the thoughts come and go, we refuse to get drawn in by the stories conveyed by those thoughts. So different thoughts come as you meditate or as you sit quiet. They tend to draw you, suck you into their content, into the stories that they're spinning about you, about your life, the past, the future. So you refuse, at least temporarily, to get drawn into those stories conveyed by the content of those thoughts. Instead, uparame, so draw in the mind back to the self. Bhagavan says, inquire what am I or who am I? So by looking at the source of the thoughts, the very ahankara, and refusing to get drawn in by the content of those thoughts, you weaken the force of those thoughts. That is here conveyed as buddhya duliti grihitaya, by resolutely stepping back and doing this uparama. Uparama is quietening these thoughts by coming back to oneself. That is the essence here. Atma samstam manah kritva na kinchidapi chintayet. And then being established, abiding as the self. Atma samstam manaha. That's the one key word we can remember. Atma samstam, atmani eva samyak sthitam. So in the self, you're firmly established. So that is where, of course, you need the holistic upadesha of the Guru and dwelling upon his words and teachings. You get that breakthrough. Aha, this is abiding as the self. In the tradition, it's also called the Brahmakara Vritti. So that Atma samstam manaha kritva na kinchidapi chintayet. By thus abiding as the self, and not allowing other thoughts to come and take you away. That is the essence of Nididhyasanam or Atma Vichara of Bhagavan. So that is the message conveyed by this. Yato yato nischarti. And then again, if the mind tries to draw you out, yato yato nischarti manaschanchalamasthiram, the mind being inherently restless, tatastato niyam yetad atmanyeva vasham nayed. All you have to do is gently come back to being the self. So this message of the Bhagavad Gita is the essence of meditation. You know, much of the Gita is dealing with many issues about the world, about dharma, about how one can have the right attitude to life, to various actions. But very little in the Gita deals with meditation. Only in the 6th chapter, there are a few key verses. And this is the heart of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhyana Yoga chapter. And this conveys the same teaching as Bhagavan's Atma Vichara. Okay? Shanai Shanai Ruparame Buddhya Tirtigihitaya. So, as you can see, this convergence, Bhagavan is now giving us the practice of Atma Vichara. The earlier half or earlier shlokas conveyed the truth of the self. And then, if we are not able to grasp that directly, there's a practice involved as well of abiding as the self. Okay? Atma samstam manaha kritva na kinchidapi chintayet, says Bhagavan here. So these two shlokas too, it's very nice to remember them if possible and understand the convergence between the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavan's teaching. At one place, Bhagavan also mentions how this Atma Samstam Manaha is not very obvious, you know, what it means to say, just stay as the self. Because our mind always looks for an alambanam. Alambanam means something to hold on to. So, which is where a very holistic teaching is required here. It's not easy for just any person to just say, okay, I just come back and abide as the self. So, there is a certain time given for the mind to resolve as the self. So Bhagavan says at one place that when there is remembrance of self, all the thoughts vanish. Okay? So if there is real remembrance of the self, the word remembrance doesn't mean you're actually recollecting something, but the idea is as the mind gently resolves, the other thoughts are dropped. They get dropped automatically. So there's a virtuous circle there. So if you give attention to the thoughts, then you get carried away by them. If you stop paying attention to those thoughts, instead come back to the thinker, then the thoughts themselves resolve completely. They stop bothering you. And so the alambanam, that desire to hold on to something itself is part of the problem. Normally we think, okay, in self-inquiry, what should I hold on to? That itself is part of the process how the mind goes and tries to grab onto something. So we are asked to become aware that you don't have to hold on to anything. And are you left in limbo? Not so. So there's a process there. If you try to just stay as a self, two things happen. One, the mind will dissolve and you're very quiescent and there's a depth in the meditation. Second, very likely, the mind will try to grab onto something. A new thought will come and try to take you away. That's where your sadhana is, to not get carried away by that thought. So if at all you have anything to do there, you just refuse to get carried away by the thoughts. What happens when you do this is that successively or gradually, the thoughts become finer and finer. So the deeper things in the mind will surface. Some deeper, perhaps fears, insecurities, anything can come up, they will come up. There you stay put with Shraddha in the Guru, in the teaching, in the method, and those deeper vrittis also surface and leave you. And so rest assured, even if you're not able to hold on to something as you imagine, gradually the deeper ragadveshas surface, it's known as kashaya, the deeper things surface up to the mind surface, and they leave you as you stay put with this practice. So that is the progression here, if at all. So our mind always likes to think in terms of progression, right? So it's not to judge our progress, but to see what is happening. And like I said, the process in Atma Vichara is that initially some superficial vrittis come, thoughts. And if you stay put without trying to grab onto something, then the deeper things surface, and that also leaves you. Finally, there is Atma Samstam Manaha, the mind abides as the self. So therefore, to summarize the answer, what should I hold on to in Atma Vichara? The whole idea is you try to look into why the mind is trying to grab and hold on to something. That very tendency is the obstacle there. Trying to grab on to something external to itself and hold on there. So whenever mind says, hold on to something, you just come back and say, no. What is I? What am I? Who am I? Or if you're comfortable, any equivalent sentence will also work there. It's fine if you are comfortable with Atma Samstam Manaha Kritva Na Kinchidapi Chintaye. The content of that also is equally effective. Drawing the mind back, not trying to grab onto any particular object or thought. So that is the essence of the method there. And so then Bhagavan goes on in his summary of the Gita to include some very important verses here. We can look at 34, verse number 34 in our summary. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmannevatmana tushtaha sthita prajnastadochyate. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmannevatmana tushtaha sthita prajnastadochyate. So one verse in the second chapter telling the Sthita Prajna Lakshana. And why I find this particularly meaningful is because this shloka also tells you something about this practice. So as I just mentioned here, as we go deeper and stay with this abhyasa or practice of Atma Vichara, the underlying vasanas or underlying tendencies which have been with us, which have been the source of our dukkha, of our misery, they also come to the surface. And then if we stay put to this practice, they leave us. They get negated. It's like the superficial illusions first leave us. And then the deeper wrong notions or illusions come to the surface. Otherwise, they never have a chance to even come up. So if I can't see what is holding me back, then I'm stuck. So here Bhagavan's method, also the same nitidhyasana of Sri Krishna Bhagavan, is that if you stay as the self, keep the mind resolved, the deeper things come to the surface. And then you can apply Viveka, you can apply this, what Bhagavan says, do not get carried away by the thoughts. You can apply that method there and allow those thoughts to resolve or go away. We can see this as a living example in the way Bhagavan even helps his mother, Srimati Alagammal, to completely get absorbed in the self. The same process everyone has to go through, even while doing the sadhana or at some point in their journey. So we get a nice description, a clear description in Bhagavan's own words. So I thought I would read that to you. That is what is explained here as Prajahati yada kaman sarvan parthamanogatan. The mind throws up all these different notions, different desires for experiences, and you have to stay put and Prajahati and negate all of that as I don't need any of that. What I am, come back to the thinker, the content of consciousness. You shift your attention from the object of consciousness to consciousness itself. What am I? Or what Atma Samstam Manaha, as Bhagavan Krishna says. The wording is different, but the content of that method is the same. So we can see how Bhagavan helped Sri Alagamma get absorbed in the self in that very process described here. I will just read that out here. Just a second. So towards the end, as the body was, the prana was leaving the body, we know this incident, but I'll just highlight some important things Bhagavan has said here. At about 8 in the evening, she was finally released from the body. Sri Bhagavan immediately rose quite cheerful and said, now we can eat. Come along, there is no pollution. There was a deep meaning in this. A Hindu death entails ritualistic pollution, calling for purificatory rites. But this had not been a death, but a reabsorption into the self. There was no disembodied soul, but perfect union with the self, and therefore no purificatory rites were needed. Some days later, Sri Bhagavan confirmed this. When someone referred to the passing away of the mother, he corrected him curtly, saying, she did not pass away, she was absorbed. And describing the process afterwards, he said, innate tendencies and the subtle memory of past experiences leading to future possibilities became very active. So that is the way the samskaras and vasanas absorb us and lead us to more and more samsara, more and more involvement in the world of duality. The past experiences, subtle memory becomes more active, leading to the future possibilities. It's how when we look at a movie, we get totally absorbed in it. So, and Bhagavan here says, scene after scene rolled before her in the subtle consciousness, the outer senses having already gone. So, mother, there outwardly there will be awareness, but inwardly, all this scene after scene keeps coming up. The samskaras are throwing up all these options. The way you might go to, let's say, a shopping mall or something where all these different objects are there, and depending on our samskaras, we go towards what we want. So like the different possibilities, which are again part of your karma, they're not all infinite. Part of your karma manifests, these are all the choices, what you want, so to speak. And then whatever our karma and vasanas are there, that will lead us in that direction. So scene after scene rolled before her, and the outer senses have already gone, having already gone. The soul was passing through a series of experiences, thus avoiding the need for rebirth and making possible union with the spirit. The soul was at last disrobed of the subtle sheaths before it reached the final destination, which is the supreme peace of liberation, from which there is no return to ignorance. So the idea here is what is explained here as Prajahati yada kaman sarvan parthamanogatan. The mind throws up all these possibilities. You have to awarefully cut all these things which are giving us these immersive experiences. They use the word for cinema, saying it was an immersive experience. It's a merit when it comes to cinematic experience, but when it comes to samsara, it's source of dukkha. it is giving us this immersive tendency. And so, prajahati, you cut yada kaman sarvan parthamanogata. And as the mind throws up these different illusions, you gently cut them and come back to oneself. So Bhagavan did that out of his grace for the mother, and he has given us the key how we can do it, employ it in our own life in moment-to-moment sadhana. And if that is maintained, then even as the body is left behind, any jiva who practices this will be reabsorbed in the self. It's not easy, but it is definitely possible. And that is the message given in Bhagavan's, helping his mother get absorbed in the self. This shloka gives us a conscious, awareful way of accomplishing the same thing in one's life, even one's life. Prajahati yada kama. And then Bhagavan has selected verses which are very meaningful in today's context. We will read the shloka and we'll tie it up with how we have to make choices, or we can make choices in our life. Yastva atmaratirevasya. This is the 38th shloka here. Yastu atmaratirevasya atmatriptascha manavaha atman yevacha santushtaha tasya karyam na vidyate. Yastu atmaratireva syat atmatriptascha manavaha atmanyeva cha santushtaha tasya karyam na vidyate. So one who revels in the self, to summarize it briefly, yastu atmaratireva syat atmatriptascha manavaha. He discovers contentment just being the self. He has no requirement or need for anything more. It is such a fulfilling truth that I am fullness. That is the very essence of the self. So there's no need or pressure for anything external to himself. Atmanyevacha santushtaha is content being that self in the self. Tasya karyam na vidyate. He doesn't have anything else to be done. So most of us have this dilemma, especially in today's world, that one has to be a contributor. The pressure to be an external contributor is very widespread. And in a way, it is understandable. A young man, if he is, just growing up and discovering the world, of course, it's good. He wants to be a contributor to this world. That's fine. Having said that, as a person appreciates the teaching of Bhagavan, it is clear the biggest contribution you can bring to the table is to realize or to become one with the self. It's not a selfish achievement, not something that amounts to being indifferent to the world. In fact, it is the biggest contribution you can bring to the table of being one with the self. So Sri Krishna also validates that. Yastu atma ratireva syat. If you're totally committed to the self, tasya karyam na vidyate. He has no other duty in this world. So no one can really come and say, hey, look, you shouldn't just sit there and practice Atma Vichara. You should go out and help the world. Well, no one has a mandate to say that. Bhagavan for sure has shown the total completeness of this path. If we are totally sincere and committed to the path of self-inquiry, that itself is a huge contribution, in a sense, to the world. If at all we think in terms of contribution, well then, this is sufficient. Tasya karyam na vidyate. There is no other duty for such a person committed to Atma Vichara. Like I said, there are all the prerequisites. If a person is honest, then this is fine. If he internally goes on ruminating and becoming bitter and cynical about the world, then well, he might as well go and contribute something. But if a person has the maturity required to pursue this method, no mandate that he has to go change the world, reform the world is required for such a person. Tasya karyam na vidyate. That is the essence of Summa Iru. Bhagavan says, be in yourself. That is itself a complete sadhana. And all other kinds of contributions to the world converge and dovetail into this Atma Vichara pursuit. So very important to remember this for those who are especially committed to Bhagavan's teaching here. And in this way, Bhagavan brings this collection of shlokas to a conclusion. We will read one more, the 40th, and conclude for today here. Here Bhagavan says that one has the possibility of being with this sadhana even while continuing whatever is going on. There's no need for an artificial external renunciation. One need not just artificially try to stop doing everything and saying that I am, pursuing Atma Vichara. So there is a naturalness to letting go. So Bhagavan assures somebody that you don't have to just necessarily give up everything and just do this alone. So that is again the other extreme of people wanting to externally renounce everything without having the internal readiness for that. So it's a natural progression. Things drop away, no doubt, but then they can happen at their own course. So Bhagavan validates that, saying one can practice Atma Vichara and gradually allow things to drop away. And in fact, what will happen is that as Atma Vichara is taken on, then there's a spontaneous activity going on in the person's mind. That kartrutvam, I am the doer, that feeling becomes more and more weak. And so Bhagavan assures the devotees that this practice of Atma Vichara for even an hour or two every day, it will maintain a current of awareness which will keep you going throughout the day. Bhagavan gives that assurance here. A similar shloka is here mentioned in the 40th shloka of the collection. We can read that. Yadrichala bhasantushto dvandvadito vimatsaraha samasiddha vasiddhau cha. So saying that when a person lives spontaneously, content with what his prarabdha and his efforts bring to him, he is not touched and not bound, even if he is active in the world. So Bhagavan gives this as an example, saying that a life of action need not be renounced. If you meditate for an hour or two every day, you can then carry on with your duties. If you meditate in the right manner, then the current of mind induced will continue to flow even in the midst of your work. It is as though there were two ways of expressing the same idea. The same line which you take in meditation will be expressed in your activities. So Bhagavan says, therefore, the life of action need not be renounced externally, just artificially. But if you meditate for an hour or two every day, so there is a clause, no doubt, one has to pay some attention to the sadhana. Then that current of awareness, current of mind induced, will continue to flow even in the midst of all the other activities. So all is not lost. Even if there are certain things one has to keep doing as a matter of course, then it's totally fine, because this grace of Bhagavan is there. The method of Atma Vichara will keep us poised, will keep us not bound by these roles that we are playing. All the roles we play, we are offering them as our arpanam, or offering to Ishvara. And then we take time off to create that space between those roles and ourselves through Atma Vichara in meditation. So that current of awareness will sustain us throughout. And the disciple goes on to ask, what will be the result of doing that? Maintaining this few hours of meditation and continuing with one's duties. Bhagavan says, you will find that your attitude towards people, events, and objects will gradually change, and your actions will tend to follow your meditation of their own accord. A man should surrender the personal selfishness which binds him to this world, and giving up the false self is the real true renunciation. And so Bhagavan says there is no conflict between the work and wisdom. So it's a wrong place to start with in trying to posit a conflict between what one is doing and the truth of what you are. So Bhagavan's focus is to develop that wisdom, and automatically what you do will change. Maybe you'll drop many of the things you're doing. Maybe you'll even take up some things you were not doing. It depends on the person there. So it's not as if he will just drop everything gradually. He might even actually take up a few things which he was earlier having some raga dvesha towards. So those raga dveshas go away. You become a spontaneous instrument in the hands of Ishvara. So that is the whole essence of this message of Bhagavan, where we allow ourselves to be used by Ishvara as a message or as an instrument in his hands, and thus we attain to that goal of felicity, to that goal of peace and truth. So with this shloka of Bhagavan, I will conclude this session, and I sincerely hope that you're all able to keep up your study of the Bhagavad Gita. Just to show you this little book which you can get, the song Celestial. It's a little booklet containing the 42 verses. So you can see how the different shlokas are all mentioned here. So with English meaning, I would suggest that you can keep it and chant and study it at your leisure. It's very helpful, very nice. So we will continue our study and practice of Bhagavan's method by and by. Thank you, Hari Om. We will end with the Shanti Mantra, and I will ask Anuragji to take over. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Shri Ramanarpanamastu. Thank you, Anuragji. Can you please take over?
Namo Ramana Raghavji. Raghavji, I join our devotees, some of them who've already expressed their gratitude, and there is one Germana Paolo on YouTube who is thanking you for this journey. It has been a very enlightening 1-year-long journey going through the 42 select verses with you, Raghavji. They have been helpful in expanding and understanding and looking within the self at the same time. Thank you for this journey. I shall of course reach out to you later this week, and we will take up another book or publication as you may guide for our further steps. Raghavji, thank you so much. A heartfelt, very warm thank you to you. Namo Ramana. In case any of the devotees might want to thank Raghavji, I'm happy to halt for that.
Yeah, thank you, Anuragji. We will keep up our studies and homage to Bhagavan by and by. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now request Narayananji to initiate Akshar Manamalai and Aarti. Raghavji, thank you so much. Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana. Tarunarunamani Tirinavali Nigar Tarumaksharamana Magulmalai Tirunadiya Tiru Adiyar Tirumaral Teriya Paravudal Porulaga Karunagaramuni Ramanari Enbuva Gainal Soliyadu Gadiyaga Arunachalam Nena Agame Arivodum Alvar Sivanulgu Alvari Arunachalam Aksharamanamale Shatra Karunagara Ganapati Karam Marulika Pai Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachalam Vena Agame Ninai Pavara Gandai Vera Rupa Arunachala Azhagu Sundaram Bol Agamum Niyum Abhinamayirpo Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala அகமுகுந்தீர்த்துன் அககுகை சீரையாய் அமர்வித்ததென்கொல் அருணாச்சலா. ஆறு காயனை ஆண்டனை கட்டி அகிலம் படித்திடும் அருணாச்சல. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ நாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. இப்பழித்தம் உனை நினைப்பித்தார் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா. ஈன்றிடும் அன்னை பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா. ஊர் சுற்று உளம்பிடா உன்னை கண்டு அடங்கி உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. என்னை அழித்திப்போர் என்னை களவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா. ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறருக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. ஐம்புல கள்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போது அகத்தினிலையோ அருணாச்சலா. ஒருவன் உன்னை ஒளித்தவர் வருவார் உன் சூதி இது அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. ஓங்கார பொருள் உப்புயர்வில்லை உனை யார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா. ஔவை போல் எனக்குன் அருளை தந்து என ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா. அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி. ஓம் भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवसविदप्रस्वसत्यं दौर्जेन प्रसञ्जामि यमदूतो स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपानाय स्वाहा ओम व्यानाय स्वाहा ओम उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः कात्याय मुरुगावल्ली दैवालये नमः सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः स्वामिनाथाय नमः दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः नटराजने नमः भैरवने नमः नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः शिवपार्वतीये नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय पुरगंड गोसीरम कदलीपळ निवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपचान्तुत्रावसरं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि पूर्वीवर समायुक्तं नागवल्ली तलयुगं कर्पूर्ण सुवर्ण संयुक्तं कर्पूर नीराजनं श्री रमण महर्षिकी समर्पयामि अम्मा रमण ओम नमो भगवते श्री रमणाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री रमणाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री रमणाय नमः कार्तिकाय नमः मुरुगाय नमः वल्ली दैवाय नमः सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः स्वामिनाथाय नमः दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः नटराजने नमः भैरवने नमः नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः शिवपार्वतीये नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः सोमो वा एकस्य राजमापत्ये यो राजातं राजो वा सोमेजते देवस्वामेधानि अङ्कीमवन्ति एतावन्तो वै देवानां स्वाहा स एवात्मैकान् प्रयच्छन्ति स एनं पुनस्तवन्दे राजाय देवसुराजा भवति न तत्र दूरवादचन्द्रकान् हेमादिसूर्यवादित्वरन्ति तमेवानन्दमानन्दरूपं तस्यैवाता सर्वमिदं विभाति कर्पूरनीराजनं श्रीरमणमहर्षिं कर्पूरनीराजनं कात्याय मुरुगावल्ली दैवानि कर्पूरनीराजनं शिवपार्वतीं समर्पयामि यो वा पुष्पं देवा पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् तस्मान् भवति चन्द्रमा वा पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् तस्मान् भवति ओम तद्ब्रह्मा ओम तद्वायु ओम तदात्मा ओम तत्सत्यम् ओम तत्सर्वम् ओम तत्पुरो नमः अन्धचर्तिभूते सकुवायां विश्वमूर्तसु त्वम्यग्नस्तं प्रसत्कारस् तं इन्द्रस्तं रुद्रस् तं विष्णुस्तं ब्रह्मत्वं प्रजापति त्वं तदा वो ज्योतिषो वा अमृतं ब्रह्मस्वरं न कर्मणा न प्रजयादने नित्यानैके अमृतत्वमानसु परेण नाहं नीतं कुवायं विप्राजते दत्यतयो विसन्ति वेदान्तविज्ञानसे नित्यदाता सन्न्यासयोगातते शुद्धसत्त्वाः ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे कारम्यभावं परमेश्वरबोधं यत्पुण्डरीकं पुरमत्य सपुंसदं तत्रावित्तकर्मकगनं विशोभस् तस्मिन् जनन्दं दशभादित्यं यो वेदादो स्वरप्रोक्तो वेदान्तस्य प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमहेश्वरः मन्त्रपुष्पं श्रीरमणमहर्षिभ्यो मन्त्रपुष्पं कात्याय मुरुगावल्ली दैवानित्यं मन्त्रपुष्पं नटराजनं मन्त्रपुष्पं शिवपार्वतीक्यं समर्पयामि ओम तत्सब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम यानि पापानि जन्मान्तरकृतानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's satsang with Raghavji. We shall reconvene next month with Mr. Michael James' session. In the interim, we shall all meet on Advent Day, 1st September, notification of which I shall be sending out tomorrow. Namo Ramana.